A scholar and expert on Black Catholicism, Dr. Shannen Dee Williams joins us now to provide more context on why the story of Sister Wilhelmina is so important to church history beyond this specific moment. Dr. Williams is an associate professor of history at Dayton University. Thank you for joining us. Shannen, you wrote the first and I believe only full history of Black Catholic nuns in the United States called Subversive Habits. It's been out for a year and you really understand the history of African-American nuns. So let's start with what comes first. When we think about Sister Wilhelmina's story, what makes her life's legacy so unique?
First off, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to speak to the story and the ongoing story about Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster. She is in many ways representative of a very long and rich tradition of Black Catholicism in the United States, which has given rise to at least 8 historically Black Roman Catholic sisterhoods, the first successful of which was the Oblate Sisters of Providence, of which Sister Wilhelmina was a member for 53 years before she left to found her community, her Benedictine community, which is now in Missouri. This story is important for many reasons. So many of the Black women and girls who have entered religious life in the Roman Catholic Church from the United States can trace their lineage to the earliest days of the U.S. Catholic Church, reminding us that the Church has always been racially diverse, that the African foundations of U.S. Catholicism and indeed American Catholicism are just as old as the European foundations. Indeed, in the case of Sister Wilhelmina, her family her family story begins in Missouri, which is one of the cradles of U.S. Catholicism and also one of the cradles of Catholic slavery. Sister Wilhelmina is a descendant of enslaved Black Catholics from St. Genevieve, Missouri. She was educated in Catholic schools in St. Louis, where she was born. She lived under a time of racial segregation, meaning that she was only allowed to enter Black Catholic schools. And then when she decided to enter religious life in the 1940s, she would have been barred, and she was in fact barred from the white sisterhoods ministering in Missouri, which led to her admission into the Oblate Sisters of Providence, who had ministered in Missouri since the late 19th century, but who were headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, another cradle of American Catholicism.
Right.
So it's an amazing story.
And they were only 2 orders that were available for her to choose from at the time, right? There was one, the Oblates that she did join, that was for Hispanic and Black nuns, and one other option. What does that mean then in reminding us of this history? What does this unconfirmed suspicion of her well-preserved body, what could it mean for Catholics in the Universal Church?
What I think it has the opportunity to do is to help us to bridge these racial divides that continue in our society. It is important to remember that the African-American sisterhoods were founded in response to the anti-Black and anti-Brown admissions policies of the nation's earliest European and white American communities. What's very significant about the African-American sisterhoods is that they were preserving the vocations of Black women and other women of color who were barred admission into white communities, that the African-American sisterhoods were always multi-ethnic, were always multilingual, because they are preserving the vocations of those who are barred from admission into communities of white communities, not only in the United States, but in Canada, Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So these are always inclusive spaces, that they are the tradition that reminds us that we had to uphold what is the greatest teaching of our church, that all people were equal in the eyes of God. And so that tradition is still with us, and it comes out of the African-American Catholic community, who always understood that racism and any form of discrimination had no place within the Universal Catholic Church. So that matters, that when we tell Sister Wilhelmina's story, that we are telling that long trajectory of those Catholics who fought to make their church really truly Catholic
and truly
and sincerely
reflective.
Catholic.
Yes, reflective of that universality.
Truly reflective,
for sure.
Truly inclusive. Absolutely.
And her story is remarkable, truly special, because they were ministering to children. These orders were meant to give resources and love and education to Black children and minority children. Is this something that's typical of these orders?
Absolutely. So they are founded specifically because there was a moment in our history, in our church's history, in which Catholic schools did not always educate all of those on the margins. And so when we think about the Oblate Sisters of Providence and the Sisters of the Holy Family, which are the second successful community of African American sisters and the second oldest in the modern Atlantic world, what we get are women who are, in the face of this unholy discrimination, upholding their faith and living their faith and saying that, yes, we are going to educate those children at the margin, both who are free and enslaved. And so that tradition of love, that tradition of faithfulness, that tradition of service, in the service of God and understanding that all of God's children had a right to a Catholic education is very much a part of the story. It's a part of the story that Sister Wilhelmina came into and certainly contributed to as a member of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, but also what she took out of her community when she decided to found her own interracial community. That community is significant. We do not have many Roman Catholic sisterhoods in the United States that were founded as interracial communities outside of the African American sisterhoods. And so she herself is bringing that tradition of universal love, of universal respect, back into the church. And that's certainly true for the Oblate Sisters of Providence, which gave rise to 3 additional Roman Catholic sisterhoods, 2 of which were predominantly white or are now interracial, and then another historically Black sisterhood. So this is in many ways a remarkable story because it reminds us that we cannot tell Sister Wilhelmina's story without also bringing with her this great tradition of Black Catholicism that has always understood and upheld the church's greatest teaching that all lives matter.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Williams.
Thank you for having me.